Guys, we spent almost the entire podcast on Dortmund, but we do want to talk briefly about the title race. And I guess the question that we really need to ask is whether this title race is over. I personally think it is. Disclaimer here. No Bundesliga team has ever overcome an 8-point deficit at this point of the season to win the Bundesliga title. I would say that if there is a team that could do it, it's last year's Leverkusen. Stefan, the question though is this year's Leverkusen last year's Leverkusen? I personally think they're not. I think they're still really good. I think they're a really, really good side. But it's just those draws, isn't it? They have now 7 draws in the Bundesliga. They still only lost the 1 game, but 7 draws in the Bundesliga. Last year they finished the season with 6 draws. So already at 21 match days, 1 draw more than last year.
Yeah, this was always going to be a difficult game. And I think, first and foremost, like, that's what I said on social media, but I said before the game kicked off that Frimpong, and obviously they were missing Grimaldo through, I don't know if it's injury or suspension. I think it's suspension. Yeah. I hadn't even noticed that Florian Wirtz wasn't in starting 11 when I posted that, which just shows how much I was paying attention. But as basically the point I was making was that, Leverkusen will either win this game or lose this game based on the quality of the backup players. And as it so happened to play out, they didn't have enough quality in them to do enough, because it was a match with very few chances. But I think Wolfsburg dominated it with, you get those games where a team racks up an XG of 2.5 or something, and you think, wow, they did really well, but then you realise it's because they took 20 shots over the course of the game, and that all kind of accumulated up. It felt like a game like that. It felt like a game which Wolfsburg actually dominated for the most part, at least in terms of the chances in the first half. Alonso then tried to make some changes. He obviously brought in Sheikh for Boniface. Wirtz came on, Frimpong came on, Buendia came on. But everyone just looked a little tired. Everyone just looked a little jaded. And I think by that point, it was almost like, well, we just simply don't have enough time to try and turn us around against a pretty decent Wolfsburg team. I thought Boniface was just bizarrely so quiet in that first half after the kind of winning goal that he put in against Cologne, and that kind of thunderous return after the whole kind of transfer saga about going to Saudi Arabia. And yeah, it was just a really, really tepid and poor performance. And, it's yes, there was that kind of penalty call for Florian Wirtz, which, we were debating in the chat about whether it was a penalty, then it gets pulled back for offside, so it doesn't really matter in the end. But
yeah,
we've been saying this a lot this season, that this Leverkusen team do just kind of fall back on Wirtz so much. And this game was really no different. It was like the whole game was just waiting for Florian Wirtz to come on. Leverkusen and Wolfsburg were waiting for him to come on to see what he would do. And he tried to do some magic, and, he tried his best, but it just didn't really work out. He's still, at the end of the day, only one guy. It was 2 points dropped, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. I don't want to kind of go too far ahead and start speculating about the Saturday game, but we talked about it before, and I wrote a newsletter early in the year or late last year, I suppose, about how I think Leverkusen and Xabi Alonso in particular is prioritising the Champions League over the Bundesliga this season. And although he would never admit it, I felt to me like this game was a perfect example of that, where he's like, I'm resting my players for the sake of resting them rather than any desperate need to pick up 3 points. I think if Leverkusen were desperate to retain that title over everything, he would have he would have started Wirtz, he would have started Sheikh, he would have started Frimpong, he would have thrown caution to the wind and thought, if these guys get tired at the end of the season, I'll leave it be, or we'll deal with it then. But he obviously feels like he has bigger fish to fry towards the end of the season. And it just felt like this game was a game in which they were just quite happy to just, well, not happy to obviously drop 2 points by any means, but it wasn't his biggest concern, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought that the game midweek maybe took quite a bit out of them, emotionally, maybe more than anything else. It was a derby, and Köln took them all the way. And I actually thought that Köln, we talked about it in a midweek podcast, so don't need to go into it as much. But I think this Köln team probably took more out of Leverkusen than Leverkusen thought. And so the rotation made sense. I'm not sure. I'm not sure Leverkusen can afford to rotate this much, especially when you consider that Bayern Munich have those extra games in the Champions League, right? I mean, this is something that we have to consider here. Leverkusen will sit on their hands all week long, while Bayern Munich have to go to Scotland to play Celtic. They go to you next after with Stefan, and I actually think that's going to be a very difficult game for Bayern.
There's potentially a scenario here, isn't there, where Leverkusen all the way around, where Bayern find themselves on Saturday in the situation which Leverkusen were in Wolfsburg, having had a really tough chip or tough game in midweek. I think it will make a difference that Xabi Alonso will have a week to prepare for this, whereas Bayern won't. I totally agree with Stefan and with both of you that Cologne game clearly took a lot out of them. Nevertheless, struggle to see the same sort of scenario as the equivalent fixture last season, when Leverkusen really had that really big statement, effectively Bundesliga winning home win over Bayern. The only difference now being that normally that game would be a case of don't lose, you just keep yourself in the title race. Now, having dropped points, it's a must win. I think they absolutely have to win, and it's at that point after Saturday where you can really start making a bit of a judgment and a bit of a guess then as to where this title is going. If they fall any further behind, I really can't see a way back. I think interesting idea from Stefan that maybe words have been had in the background as to what's more important. Who knows? Don't want to speculate too much, but would you put it beyond Fernando Caro to have had words at Leverkusen saying no, it's all about the step up, and for him a step up would be with Bundesliga, tick, done that. It's all about Champions League now. You have to perform on a bigger stage, boost the brand.
Yeah, but
I don't know.
The brand for
Surely
what
not.
sake? I mean, you're right. Fernando Caro exists, and he would say this.
Yeah, I don't even think it'd be behind closed doors.
Fernando Caro, we've
Yeah.
all written articles
Sky
on
is
Fernando
blue,
Caro.
bears in woods. Fernando Caro exists.
The 5,000 seat stadium in Leverkusen.
Fill it with Cologne fans for cup games.
Sure. We all know that half of Cologne is in reality closet Leverkusen fans, and the same is probably true for Düsseldorf too. But jokes aside, I could see a world where Caro has given that as an internal strategy. It's like, oh yeah, next level is the Champions League. It's the sort of thing that Uli Hoeneß would do, only that in Uli Hoeneß's case, the club would actually go out and do it because they have the means to do it. I mean, even when Bayern didn't have the means to do it, Bayern would go out and do it because, there's just that mentality written into the club. But I don't know. I find it a stretch to see this Leverkusen team win the Champions League in a world where teams like Liverpool exist.
Also, have I understood the Champions League draw correctly by thinking that Leverkusen are likely to play either Manchester City, Real Madrid, or Bayern Munich?
Yeah, but
no.
Only Bayern would be an issue here for them at the current level.
I don't think it's really about winning the Champions League for Leverkusen. I think it's just about doing better than they usually do. I think they would take like a semi-final and second place in the Bundesliga.
It's about visibility on a big stage. It's precisely that they'll have. Again, don't want to just dismiss everyone involved by Leverkusen, because I certainly would not suggest that Xabi Alonso and his coaching staff, or even Simon Rolfes would think like that. Yeah, but like you said, it wouldn't surprise me that the same sort of thinking higher up the chain would be similar to, I think, the thinking behind RB Leipzig getting to the semi-final that one time. You suspect sometimes that the goal is not necessarily to win; it's just to be present.
You want to do as well as you can, don't you?
And Leverkusen are going to announce a new kit sponsor. It's likely New Balance this week. So, that is supposed to give them a bigger platform. They went for a bigger brand because Costor couldn't deliver for them, right? So, this is also about pushing the brand to the next level. I personally think the thing that pushes your brand to the next level is winning actual trophies, not a semi-final appearance in the Champions League.
You'd think, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I also personally think, and this sounds maybe flippant, but they would be better off winning another DFB Pokal in Berlin, ending the season with actual silverware than a semi-final appearance in the Champions League. Yeah, the Champions League semi-final appearance gives you a platform, but how many of you can remember a team reaching the semi-final like 4 years ago?
Yeah, but no one outside of Germany watches the Pokal. So
yeah, but that's your constituency.
No, but that isn't Leverkusen's constituency. Leverkusen's constituency is international fans because they know they don't have any fans in Germany.
Yeah, but international fans won't remember a semi-final appearance either.
I think that's true. I think
how many people remember Schalke reaching the Champions League semi-final against Man United?
Well, see, I completely disagree.
I do.
Because
it was a great game.
You do. You're a United fan.
But Manu, if you asked any football fan in the UK about Leverkusen, they would mention that final against Real Madrid at Hampden.
Absolutely.
Every single UK football fan,
at least before last year. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and if you asked any UK football fan how many Pokals have Leipzig won in the last 10 years, they'd say, "What the hell's a Pokal?" So they're completely different scales. The Champions League's got Champions League finals bigger than the Super Bowl. There's nothing compares in football. And I know the semi-final and the quarterfinal is not quite the same, but I'm convinced that the people that decide what Leverkusen do, that's their next plan, because the Bundesliga, that title in the Bundesliga last season, it was all about getting that monkey off the back. It was all about winning that first title and. Herdecki, up there with the ultras, singing after that, at this point in the season, probably, with the tannoy and stuff like that. It was all about, can they overcome that history? It wasn't so much can they beat Bayern, but can they beat history? And in the title defense just doesn't have that same kind of allure to it. Which I really sound really quite pessimistic and like some marketing bro or something, but. I don't know. I just think it's just a theory of mine, but and even just and on a personal level as well. I think the thing that keeps Xabi Alonso, Florian Wirtz, guys like that at the club isn't let's go and win another league title. It's let's see how far we can go in the Champions League. I'm convinced of that as well.
I think that's probably another potential consequence of a possible defeat to Bayern on Saturday. Does that effectively start nailing? Or start hammering that nail into the Xabi Alonso era by Leverkusen? Is that the moment where we then? Maybe I'm philosophizing too much at this point, but at that point, Champions League's unlikely. All right, German Cup still in that. Bundesliga defense is out the window. Alonso's already surprised everyone, and I think ultimately done the right thing by staying on board for one more year. He's got a good team there. That team was never going to fall apart. But yeah, is that the moment where the long farewell begins? Is that too much?
I would say that the legacy of Klopp and Dortmund was the back-to-back Bundesliga titles, right? And then the third year reaching the Champions League final. And I do agree with you. The Champions League final is a completely different beast. I'm just not convinced a semi-final will do it. Right? That is maybe where I draw the line. Yeah, and you're 100% right. I mean, the Champions League final is in Munich this year. I mean, that is when you compare that, 200 and something million people watch the Super Bowl, and 1.5 billion people watch the Champions League final. So I'm sorry, Super Bowl fans, but get in line. You're somewhere behind cricket. So you know what I mean?
We're all behind Indian cricket, to be fair.
No, not even saying that as a joke. This is a factual statement. You know, and so. Yeah, I mean that is definitely a point. Dortmund, how much did they benefit? The on-field stuff aside, but financially they benefited massively from reaching the final last year. Of course, in Dortmund fashion, they threw it all out the window in less than like a year. But it is something that does get remembered. We all remember the Champions League finalists. I'm just not sure it's the same for semi-finalists. I think that's maybe where I draw the line.
Yeah, I guess Leverkusen will always be able to rely on the fact that once they move on from their golden era, they won't sign some Cologne head coach who, will struggle to get them into the top four again, like Dortmund did.
To Leverkusen.
But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm not quite sure what's going to happen with Xabi Alonso. It's a big question, but we'll need to see. I mean, the question is, do you think he'll leave Leverkusen before Vincent Kompany leaves Bayern? There's the real question for you.
I personally think Xabi Alonso is going to Real Madrid. And that position is not going to be available anytime soon.
But that's the big difference between him and Klopp, isn't it? Klopp was this kind of nobody, well, not nobody, but like he was a head coach who came out of nowhere from Mainz, who became Mr. Dortmund, and his brand was synonymous with Dortmund. Xabi Alonso from day one has always been this world-class footballer who played for the biggest coaches and clubs in the world. He's in Leverkusen, doing everyone a favour, staying in Leverkusen and doing what he's doing at Leverkusen, and he will be off at some point. It's always...
He is the UFO that has landed there.
Well, I was thinking like Sinatra in Las Vegas or something. He's there for the summer or something. No, he's there to do a residency or whatever. Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Well, no, it's kind of like Elvis to Vegas before Vegas was a thing, right? Because Elvis made Vegas.
Yeah. That's actually a good comparison to Leverkusen town centre, to be honest with you. Vegas before Vegas is just like...
It's a desert in the Rhineland that like has like a hotel, a stadium, and that's it. That's basically Vegas before Elvis showed up.
It's got its big sign. It's like rather the equivalent of the Welcome to Las Vegas. It's got the big Bayern cross.
It has a big sign, yes. The comparisons are crazy, yes.
Yeah, there's a piece to be written on that.
My goodness. Yeah, well, we should try and touch on Bayern before we have to finish up here, because in typical Matt and Manu fashion, we're approaching an hour here. We're nowhere near finished.
Well, how much is there to say about Bayern Munich? I mean, it was 80 minutes or so of passing back and forward until they got a penalty, and then they won the game. That's my match summary. I mean, Stefan, you are going to write an article. Word has it that you've written 1,500 words on Harry Kane, so here you go. Tell us what you think.
Yeah, well, for the respect of our hard-paying subscribers, I'm not just going to read out the newsletter. I'm sure they'll be happy to read it themselves. Yeah, I mean, it was more penalties. Harry Kane's now got 9 penalties this season, which is obscene. I actually looked this up as part of the article. He's averaging 0.53 penalties per game in the Bundesliga this season. Just think about that. Most strikers don't even average 0.5 goals per game. He's averaging 0.5 penalties per game, which is just absolutely bizarre. But the point of the article kind of goes into talking about how those penalties are maybe masking what is actually a bit of a poor season from Harry Kane, which won't really come as a huge surprise to anyone who listens to this podcast or chats to us in the subscriber chat, because it's something I've been kind of mumbling about for much of the season. And to no great surprise, Werder Bremen, like they did in the reverse fixture, just completely bowed down to Bayern one way or another, and just kind of via Anthony Young's 2 mistakes leading to 2 penalties, Bremen just didn't really bother showing up to this game. And it wasn't a huge surprise. So you're right, there's not a huge amount to talk about from this game specifically. But I'm actually really interested in what happens from here on in, because I think we talked about this maybe on one of the bonus shows last week, Manu, but if you look at Bayern's fixture list, they've got a kind of similar setup to what they had at the start of the season, where they had this run of really easy-ish fixtures, kind of maybe, again, climaxing with the Dynamo Zagreb 9-2 win and the 5-0 win over Werder Bremen. Then they had Leverkusen, Villa, Frankfurt, Stuttgart, Barcelona, which kind of derailed things a little bit. Took the air out of the sales, if you will, to the window of the sales for Vincent Kompany's good start to the season. And we're kind of, I'd be interested to see if history repeats itself here, because they've had a really good start to 2025, but then they play Celtic, Leverkusen, Celtic, Frankfurt, and then Stuttgart. And, without sounding too optimistic about the title race here, but if Leverkusen manage to win that game on Saturday and then Frankfurt and Stuttgart take something off Bayern, I don't really expect Celtic to knock Bayern out of the Champions League. I think that'd be a huge upset. I think they could cause them some upsets because they've been quite decent in the Champions League this year, but I don't expect them to knock them out. But if they can kind of, cause some issues there, and then Frankfurt and Stuttgart can obviously pour some misery on them too, then it'll be interesting to see if, I guess, like I keep saying, history will repeat itself in that sense. In a weird kind of way, Bayern's fixture list this season has gone from, it goes from block of easy games to block of hard games to block of easy games to block of hard games. And they've just had a block of easy games, and now they're about to go back into block of hard games. So it'll be interesting to see what Harry Kane and that can do in the weeks ahead.
I think it must be difficult for outsiders at times. So maybe if you just take a glance at the surface of Bayern Munich, there you are, 8 points clear at the top of the Bundesliga, potentially going 11 points clear after a game against your closest rivals at the weekend. All right, Champions League playoff is could have been avoidable, but with all due respect to Celtic, you would expect them to get through it. And then by the end of this month, you could you avoid defeat against the teams third and fourth, and you're rolling on towards reclaiming your title. And yet, the vultures are circling, aren't they? Still, there are warning voices and there are little moans in the background. Harry Kane's penalty rate masks and otherwise not quite as prolific goal scoring ratio. Vincent Kompany is clearly on the face of it getting the result, but we all know watching the games that it's nowhere near as convincing. There might be big names in that squad from Neuer, Müller, or be it large on the bench, Kimmich, Kane, but are there those sort of big personality Bayern players that you recognise from previous generations? Not quite. Really strange constellation in Munich these days. But I think we'll know more at the end of this month. I think, as Stefan said, the upcoming 3 or 4 fixtures there across all competitions will give us a good idea of where it's going. And then I sort of wish for Vincent Kompany, really, that he does get through his first season just about unscathed at Bayern, because I feel like in a little bit of a hiding to nothing at the moment. Even if he does go on to win the Bundesliga with Bayern, I don't suspect he'll get the praise that he necessarily deserves for it. Maybe in a way, Niko Kovac doesn't get the praise that he maybe deserves for winning it, because it's seen as such a given. But intriguing times in Munich.
Manu, can I jump in really quickly, just back off what Matt was saying about the kind of on paper looks fine? Last week there was reports about Harry Kane's having a release clause in his contract, and I posted
Time for journalism.
Yeah. Well, I
posted clickbait.
Yeah, more or less. Well, I made a joke about it on social media, saying, if any top club are willing to pay 60 million euros for Harry Kane this summer, then I'll happily admit the rest of my days that Bayern are the best run club in European football. Obviously making a joke about the fact. And then I said, excluding any fundraiser efforts from exasperated Bayern Munich fans to lend another club the means to take him off their hands. I was obviously making a joke about the fact that, if anyone was going to spend 60 million euros on Harry Kane in the summer, they'd be not out of their mind, but it'd be, akin to, maybe not too far off, Barcelona spending all that money on Lewandowski, who, of course, is still scoring goals, but, he's his own kind of issue for Barcelona. It had 40 responses, and 98% of them were obviously Tottenham and England fans saying, what the hell are you talking about? The guy's got more goals than God this season. How can you possibly say he's an hindrance to Bayern Munich? And then and that's the kind of nuances that Matt's talking about. We're on paper, they're 8 points clear. Harry Kane's got like 28 goals in 28 games, I think, this season, and everything looks fine. But you only have to check our group chat every weekend with Bayern Munich fans, and it's a growing consensus to say he goes missing in big games. And again, my newsletter goes into a lot of detail on this week, but it's a potential issue for them in the long run. But you're right. It's like Matt says, everything's fine at Bayern until it's not. We got that running joke where it's like that kind of thing they say about society is only 3 hot meals away from falling into chaos, and Bayern Munich only 3 defeats away from becoming FC Hollywood. And they've now got 4 big games coming up, and by the end of February, we could be back in a situation where it's all hands on deck and everyone's freaking out at the Allianz Arena, or Sabina Strasse, I suppose.
Well, Harry Kane has 21 goals, right, in 21 games. That sounds good. Let's take the penalties away, and that number goes to 12. That's not very good.
Yeah, when's the last striker at Bayern who had 12 goals in 21 league games and wasn't getting hounded out of Munich?
Mario Gomez? Oh, wait, not hounded out of Munich. You will have to go back to the 90s, my friend. Giovanni Elber?
Yeah, well, even like Mandzukic or someone like that, he was never really appreciated as a Bayern striker. He probably had that kind of level of goal scoring.
Yep.
And, he wasn't ever really appreciated as a top-class
Mario
striker.
Gomez had 28 goals in 34 games, and he was still haunted out of Munich. Yeah, I mean, this is true. This has happened because he didn't score in the big Champions League final. I mean, and on the surface, like, I listened to the commentator for it was actually, I think it was Kevin Hartshard, who was a friend of the podcast. So I don't want to throw Kevin Hartshard under the bus because, he's done a lot for the show, but he's like, his commentating after the ninth penalty was so polite. He's like, he's making an easy thing look easy. I say, oh no, wait, he's making a difficult thing look easy, he said when he scored his ninth penalty. And I'm like, yeah, sure. I mean, penalties, like, I don't want to step up there, but it's still a 75% chance that you score from there, statistically, right? I mean, and
Heiner said after the game that he thinks Harry Kane's the best penalty striker he's ever seen, which was maybe a potential dig at Lewandowski. But even Lewandowski was a player who dealt with criticism at Bayern for not scoring enough goals in the last stages of the Champions League and things. So it's what happens when you're a striker at Bayern Munich. But
I mean, the Harry Kane thing too. He scores his penalties against Bremen 2, right? Or against Augsburg, it was 2, I think. Or was it 1? And then one and no, he scored 2 against Augsburg as well. And then of course he has penalty moments like that quarterfinal against France at the World Cup, where he then puts it over the bar, right? So we still need to see him score those penalties in big moments as well. It is an interesting one, right? Because from the outside everything looks great, but we can all dig holes into the story quite easily, I think, is what this Bayern season is. And I think this next block and this Leverkusen game on the weekend will give us an outlook. And I personally think that they're favorites to win the title now by a long shot. And I think, my prediction is even that they're going to beat Leverkusen on the weekend. We're going to get into the preview show later this week, but that's sort of like where we are at right now. But we are also out of time, so I'm going to wrap this up because we're over an hour, which I entirely blame on Matt Ford.
I said my Dortmund bit about half an hour ago.